All right, everyone. Welcome to another Sasquatch Theory podcast. On this episode, we have Silvia from the state of Texas, and she had a very terrifying experience one day at a cemetery when she was doing paranormal research. It makes me wonder if the cryptid topic is somehow connected with the paranormal, because a lot of people talk about Bigfoot encounters and experiences by cemeteries. And a lot of times when people are having Bigfoot activity on their property, they're also having paranormal things happening inside the house. So what are your thoughts about that? And let me know down in the comments below. Have you had a Bigfoot encounter before? If so, please contact me sometime at sasquatchtheory@outlook.com. All right, guys, with all that being said, let's dive into Silvia's Bigfoot encounter from the state of Texas. All right, Silvia, welcome to Sasquatch Theory. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's great to have you on the podcast. And Silvia, if you would, tell me a little bit about yourself, kind of where you're from, and this possible Bigfoot experience that you had.
I am from Fort Worth, Texas, born and raised. Uh, I'm a teacher. I teach fourth graders, and I have three kids. Many years ago, I was very obsessed with ghost hunting, which is kind of what fell me into the situation of the story that I'm about to tell. So,
Okay, very good. And what were you doing that day? What took place, and where were you at?
so to give a little backdrop, like I said, I was very obsessed with ghost hunting. I had my cousin who I'm really close with. He was more like a brother than a cousin to me, and him and his wife had moved to a town in Texas called Jacksonville, which is East Texas. It was about 2.5 hours from Fort Worth, where me and the rest of the family were living. His wife was telling me, because she knew I was like super into ghost hunting. And she was telling me, man, you have to come hit this place over here in Jacksonville. Like, it's crazy. Everybody knows it's haunted. I've heard so much about it. And so after her telling me that several times, I just decided to do some research on it. And so this is back, I should mention, this is probably back in like 2007, 2008. So this is, before, like, well, if Google Earth was around, I didn't know about it, but this is before, cell phones had like the GPS on them where you could just like type something in and go anywhere with your cell phone. So I had to do research on exactly how to even get to the place, because she's explaining it to me. We don't know this town, Jacksonville. We're not from there. It's, out in the middle of nowhere. And East Texas is like the wooded area of Texas. Like Fort Worth, where I'm at, is city, suburban. So this was it was pretty intriguing. So I did some research on it, and what it is it's a monument. It's called I'm gonna pronounce it the way I think it's pronounced, but it's called a monument. And what it is it's a site where there was a massacre between Native Americans and settlers,
Can you
and
say
supposedly
that?
the
Sorry to cut you off. Can you say that site again? It kind of cut out.
Kalaw is spelled Killoughh. I've heard people pronounce it all kinds of different ways. I pronounce it Kalaw. And it's a monument, and it's surrounded by the family cemetery for the Kalaw family. And it was, like I said, it was a massacre site. The way I heard the story on what happened with that, short and sweet, is that the settlers were like out on the last day of harvest. They had made an agreement with the Native Americans that because it was the last day of harvest, like there would be peace. Like nobody would mess with anybody. And when the Kalaw family went out to do that, they were massacred by natives. Now, there's a whole bunch of different theories and stuff to that, but that's just the way I heard it. And so this place is supposed to be like deeply haunted, to the point where when I was doing research on it before I decided whether I wanted to go out there, I had seen that an actual news station went out there and did a report on it. And to me, that was like solidifying, like, this is legit. I want to try it out. So at that time I was married. My husband had bought me for Mother's Day that year a K2 meter and an EMF detector. So I was like, what I felt like locked and loaded, ready to go. I had everything I needed. I was ready to go ghost hunt. And so we made the decision to take the trip out there, and it was just me and him. Um, We did. I had made the decision that because we had never been there before, I didn't want to come in darkness. I wanted to get there before dark, before it got dark outside, so that I could at least know my surroundings. And that way we could just kind of walk around and tour it and just see what's up. And that way, when it does get dark, we kind of know, like, okay, I'm looking in this direction. Over there is, should be this from what I remember earlier. And so we got there. So this monument is exactly dead in the middle of the woods. There's literally like a little drive that was built to go up to the monument, and a tiny little parking lot for probably like 4 cars. And there's a historical marker there that explains the story of why it's a historical marker and what that monument's for. And then you can walk from the parking lot to the monument is probably like a 12-second walk. And it's just like a little trail that goes through grass. And then when you get up to the monument itself is fenced in with chain link fence. Like a short one, just like a maybe 4 or 5 foot tall fence right there. And so I think that's just because there's the cemetery there. So it just kind of fences it off to show, like, this is a monument, the cemetery. The monument is like I guess you would call it like a monolith. It's kind of like a super skinny pyramid. It's pretty tall. And like I said, there's just graves. There's probably like 30 graves. So when I say cemetery, I'm talking like tiny. And we walked around for a couple minutes. We got there. We didn't have any of the equipment like on because we were just kind of doing a tour walk just to see, like, oh, we'd never been here. Like, let's see what's going on. And also because it was summer, like, let's scare off any snakes that might be, kind of fiddling around or whatever. And I mean, literally within minutes of getting there, we started hearing this noise. And the noise was starting, farther out. And so the noise was coming from the woods behind the car. So like when you pull into that little parking lot, like I said, that place is like 360-degree woods, minus the little road that gets you up to the parking lot, right? So the noise is coming from behind the car, and we're like on the little trail, like right before you get inside the fenced area to the monument. So me and my husband both freeze, and I always picture, like, in my mind how we must have looked like if somebody else had seen us, like a cartoon characters with the eyes poking out of our head. And like we're sitting there trying to figure out, like, what is this? And when I say like noise, it was like trees or really big tree branches breaking and just breaking. And we're just sitting there looking and looking and like waiting and waiting. And as we're sitting there, the noise is getting closer and closer and closer. And it literally got to the point where one more noise and that thing's about to bust out of the woods and we're going to see what it is. And I mean, I think my heart was probably pounding out of my chest at that point because I was just like, what are we about to see? Like, something's going to get us because, like, in order to get to the car, we have to go towards whatever that is. And so as soon as it got to that point, the noise stopped. And I don't even remember if we were talking to each other. I think we were just trying to stay as silent as possible. Like, whatever this thing is, please go away, please go away. And so I don't know how long it was that we stood there, like, listening and waiting. And I also remember thinking too, because I don't know if I can explain this right. So the monument is fenced off. And then basically all the wooded area outside of that is apparently private property. And so that was fenced. So you could really only be right there inside the monument area and the parking lot. And then all the woods behind that was, I don't know who owns it or whatever it is, but it said there was like one of those big metal like farm gates right there. And there's a sign on there like posted no trespassing, private property. And so I was thinking too, like, well, whatever this is it going to be able to get over that fence? But if it's breaking tree limbs or trees, it almost literally sounded like it was breaking trees in half. If it could do that, it can get over a fence. And so the noise stopped. And we sat there for, I don't know, a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. I don't know. I have no idea. I just know I was scared to death. And that noise stopped. The next thing we heard was, this is going to sound really weird. The noise of like those high powered drills that they use to like change your tires when you go to a tire shop. And we just kept hearing it, like, just blasting off, zoom, zoom. And I was like looking at my husband like, we're in the middle of the woods. Like, how is that possible? And we're sitting here trying to figure out, like, what is that? What is that? Like, who could be out there? And I mean, if you look at the Google Maps and you can see like sort of the imagery of this location, nobody's out there doing that. Nobody is out there doing that. So that went on for, I don't know, probably like a minute or two. And then, of course, we're still standing there. Like, and every second that goes by, I'm just like, can we make it to the car? Can we make it to the car? And then after that noise stopped, there was kind of a pause without anything going on. And then the next thing we heard was, I would assume that whatever this thing was left. But when it left, it was in the top of the trees, almost like giant wings flapping into the tree limbs. And after it, I guess you could say, flew off, of course, we stood there for, I felt like we stood there for probably like 10 minutes because we were scared to move. And when we finally kind of figured, and I should back up and just kind of reiterate, the sun had not even gone down yet. It was still light outside when this happened. I mean, it was getting there, but it was definitely not dark, no flashlights needed. Like, we could definitely see the tree line. There wasn't like a, "Oh, I wonder what's out there in the darkness." Like, we could see. It was definitely light outside for us to be able to see. And, once we finally got up the nerve, we went back over to the car, and we just kinda stood there for a minute, and I think we're probably almost even debating, like, do we stay or do we get scared out of here before we even have a chance to do what we came to do? And we ended up deciding we're gonna stay. And I had the K2 meter and the EMF detector in my hand, and we're going back down the little trail that goes back into the fenced area of the monument, and the EMF detector went off. And I thought that was really weird because, again, we are in the middle of the woods. There's not like power lines there. There's no reason for any of that to be going off, but I'm no expert. I'm just like, okay. And I mean, immediately when that happened, like, they always talk about, oh, you get the chills on the, all the way through your body and up the back of your spine. And that's what I got. I could feel them like all the way up into the hair follicles of my skull. And like, I immediately had tears in my eyes. I have no idea why. And I'm telling my husband, take a picture right here. And I'm pointing like behind my head, like, take a picture right here, take a picture right here. Like, I feel something. And so he took pictures, and like nothing really ever came of the pictures or anything, which I think my deepest regret about this whole situation is I wish it had happened 5 years ago when I could have had a phone and been recording versus, back in '06 when we didn't have the capabilities to do that yet. But we ended up staying for a couple hours in the darkness. K2 meter never went off again, EMF detector never went off. A group of teenagers ended up showing up because, I think out there for them it's a small town and it's just like something to do. And they had showed up and of course seen us there, and we told them what we were doing, and they could see that we were kind of like taking it very seriously. Like, we weren't out there to like play around. And so they ended up being like very respectful and sitting quietly. We ended up all, there's like a little ledge on that monolith monument. And so we all kind of hopped up there. We're just sitting there in the darkness and the pitch black, just staring out there, like trying to see if we could see anything, hear anything. And, nothing ever happened after that, and I think back on it, and I think it's really strange that at the time, I didn't really notice that I'm not necessarily a super outdoorsy person, but I will say that I don't remember hearing any noise in those woods after that. Like, it was silent, and I just think that's really weird. I don't even remember sex or anything, and, we have, like, those cicada things out here just rattle off, like, nonstop, and I don't remember hearing any of, and, of course, like, at the time, it didn't occur to me, but now that I think back on it, I'm just like, "Man, what could have scared even insects to, like, be quiet and for hours afterwards?" Like, doesn't make sense to me. So, yeah, that's pretty much what happened.
Okay, I appreciate you for sharing that with me. So it sounded like a big creature was coming at you guys. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you could hear branches breaking?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely, like, we could tell that it was unnatural. Like, whatever it was not a normal sound of, like, a raccoon climbing a tree, or this was like branches, or almost like, I want to say either like thicker branches or like the kind of skinnier, like younger sapling trees or something, but like definitely being snapped. Like, and it was the way the sound was coming, it was like a straight path, like coming towards us. It wasn't just like, oh, it's coming over from here and then another one over from there. It was like a path. And we were literally like looking at like the path of the noise, just like waiting for something to pop out.
Yeah, that does sound like Bigfoot activity. I've had the same experience here in Missouri where it sounded like something was zigzagging through the woods coming right at me after I did a whoop call, and it was getting ready to get dark, and you could hear a bunch of limbs and trees and saplings just snapping. It sounded like a bulldozer was crashing through the woods, but whenever it got close, it just stopped at the edge of the wood line. Everything
Yeah,
got quiet. It
exactly.
got dark, and I never heard it leave, and just
Yes.
everything stopped after
And I
that.
always told my husband that. I said, "Why do we not hear it leave the way it came in? Why do we hear something leave in the top of the trees and it didn't break limbs on the way back out? It doesn't make sense to me. I
Yeah.
can't figure it out."
Yeah, that sounds like Bigfoot activity. The only thing I would say that doesn't sound like Bigfoot activity is whenever you heard the wings flapping up in the tree, and that's pretty unusual. Maybe it was something else.
Yeah, I don't know. And this is why I say like I've had so many back on it and I'm like, well, it's Native American territory. Was it some kind of like shape-shifting being? Like, and the thing is, like, I don't know how much I believe in that stuff. And to be honest with you, on the way out there, like I said, we were looking for ghosts. We were not looking for Bigfoot. I couldn't even tell you back then what my opinion on Bigfoot was. I don't even know if that was in my plane of being at that time. So, and I don't think even when we left that night, I was not thinking Bigfoot. Like I said, I've bounced from so many theories over the years, but just the tree breaking to me was like, what else would that be? And then you don't hear it leave. And I've heard a lot of other stories, especially like on your channel too, where people have talked about like kind of the weird mechanical noises. I've heard it mentioned very minimal amount of times, but I've heard it mentioned. So I was like, okay, maybe this isn't out of the realm of Bigfoot. But I just kind of what threw me off all these years was the mechanical like drill sound. Because I was like, what is that? That doesn't sound like something that would fall into the category of Bigfoot, but I've kind of just, heard sprinklings of it in stories here and there. So I was like, well, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, that is interesting that you went out there to research paranormal activity and you ran into something else. It's kind of random that you had Bigfoot activity in a paranormal area. That almost makes me feel like it's connected somehow. And a lot of people talk about like portals and energy, and it's strange that you heard the mechanical sounds out there. I've heard
Mhm.
similar out in the woods. I mean, I wouldn't say like a drill, but I've heard like it sounds like a stop sign got hit really hard, or
Mm.
like someone like shut the hatch to a tank, like a loud metal bang. I've heard that
Mhm.
several times, and it's just out there in the woods, and it happens randomly. There's no answer to it, but I don't know. People have theorized that like that's the portal opening whenever you hear like the metal bang sound or mechanical
Mhm.
noises. And there's other people that say that Sasquatch, I don't know, are kind of like their vocalizations are like parrots, like they can mimic things that they hear. So that's a
Yeah.
possibility too.
Yeah. And the thing too about that, because I've heard that, right? And so I'm constantly like, if I learn something new by listening to somebody else's story or I hear a piece of information, then I'm like, oh man, I didn't think about that. I wished I had had that knowledge in that moment when it happened so I could be like, oh, because I don't, up into that happened, literally, this started happening within like 10 minutes of us arriving. So we really didn't even have time but to do a quick little lap around that cemetery. And then I felt like, everything kind of went haywire. So I didn't really, I wish I could think back and be like, did we hear anything right before that happened? Like, was there whistling? Was there something? Like, all I can tell you is that right before the action started kind of like rolling, nothing drew our attention. But I don't know.
Yeah. And have you ever experienced paranormal activity out there?
Out there, no. I
Yeah.
mean, we kind of had some, like I said, those kids showed up and we're kind of out there just sort of trying to night observe. And, this is pitch black. It's the woods, there's no light source. And so we're just kind of like, the darkness plays tricks on your eyes. So we're just every now and then one of us would be like, did you see something over there? Or did you see something over there? But nothing that was definitive. Like I said, I had done research on that place and it was just like a lot of people were like, man, they were too scared. They didn't even last like 2 hours out there and they would run out of there. And I was like, I'm on it. I want to be there. I want to be scared. I want to know. I've had a couple of experiences prior to that, just like in my own home that got me interested and made me sort of, I guess you could say, a believer or less of a skeptic. And so, like I said, I was really into it, but I'd never in a million years expected that was going to be my experience there. But
Yeah, that is interesting. So, what other encounters have you had with the paranormal? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Um, yeah, the very first thing that happened that I can like really clearly remember was my grandma, she raised me and she lived out in the country, and I had my own room over there, so every night before bedtime was, pick up your toys and put them away and get ready for bed. And so I was at my toy box. So the way the layout of the room is, the toy box is right up against the wall. She had built this thing herself, so it just had like a little, it was made out of wood. It just had a little lifting lid on it, kind of like the chests that you can get. And I was putting stuff in there, and directly behind me is the door to the bedroom, and that's like a hallway straight out of there. And to the right, right out of my bedroom is the spare room. And the door stayed open there. There's nothing creepy about that house. I'd never been creeped out about that house a day in my life. And for some reason, I felt like I needed to turn around and look. And I turned around and looked, and I saw what I thought was my grandma going into that room. And I thought that was weird because we don't ever go in there, and what is she doing going in there? And she was carrying a candle, like, in one of those, I don't know what they're called, but the little metal that has, like, the little hook on it, like a coffee mug hook? And it was one of those kind of candle holders, and she was holding that and going into that room, and she was wearing, like, a really long, like, white nightgown, which wasn't out of the ordinary. She's kinda old school, and she wore stuff like that, so I was like, "What is she doing?" I go in there, there's nobody there. So, that was, like, my first kind of experience. When I was little, though, at the time, I wasn't like, "That was a ghost." I just literally thought I hallucinated, and I blew it off. But as I got older, I just, like, clearly realized, like, "Okay, I know what I saw." I never doubted what I saw, and that was not a hallucination. Um, More recently, around the time of the claw, like I said, I was really into ghost hunting. Part of what kinda refired or reignited my interest in it is because we had had, like, a string of deaths in the family. I mean, it was just, like, kinda one after another. And so we decided to or I should say I decided to use a Ouija board in my own house because I wanted to get in contact with my dad. And, I don't know I don't know how much I believe in all that stuff, but I do know that after that happened, there was a string of activity in the house, and, it was kinda wild. I think fortunately for me, I'm not the kind of person that runs and screams, and I also don't react. So, I think after an amount of time of things kinda happening and happening and happening, and I'm not responding, I guess my theory is they get bored and move on. So, I don't I don't know, but I definitely know that I probably won't ever use a Ouija board ever again because I just kinda felt like things were fine until I did that, and then all of a sudden weird things were happening. So, um, yeah, so that's pretty much it. We had other incidents at my college here in Fort Worth, um, that was pretty I don't wanna say significant, but, my husband and his brother were both art majors at Texas Wesleyan University here in Fort Worth, and at the time, the art majors had this little house that was an art building. It was an old house, and, it was 2 stories, and they were both working on projects, and they were like, "We're gonna pull an all-nighter." So I was just there hanging out, and we decided we're gonna take a nap, and there's, like, this little, I guess, would've been the living room of that house, and there was, like, 2 couches in there and, like, a vending machine and just, like, just random kinda stuff for college students. And so we decided we'll just go in there and sleep on the couches and take a little nap, and there's a light switch right there. We turned off the lights and we lay down, and within, like, a few minutes, the light switch flipped back on. And the first time it happened, we're just kinda like, "Oh, maybe it's one of those fluke things where we didn't quite flip it all the way down so it, flipped back up." And so I think I'm the one that got up and turned it off, and I laid back down, and within a few minutes, it flipped back on again. And I think that might have been the only time in, like, my history of weird things happening where I responded, and I said, "Okay, I'm gonna turn it back off. Please leave it off." And we laid back down and it flipped on again, and the boys were just like, "It's time to go. We're not gonna sleep here." And we kinda packed up and got out of there, and that was that.
Yeah, I don't blame you. That can be extremely frightening. And I mean, I wouldn't recommend people to play with the Ouija board. A lot of bad things can happen, and you'll just have like unfortunate events, kind of
Yeah,
bad
I
luck
feel
in your
like
life.
my excuse to that though was like I had lost my dad and I was so desperate to get communication that I was willing to try anything. Like I knew like the history of the Ouija board. I knew the bad things of it, but I guess I convinced myself like if I'm coming in here with good intentions and I'm desperate, like okay. And you know, that's kind of where I was at with that. So
No, I understand that, and you just gotta, I don't know if you pray, but you just kind of gotta do that and have faith and know that everything will be all right, and you'll get through life. But when you play with stuff like that, it makes things more difficult, and
yeah.
I just don't recommend it to people. I mean, I've heard people say that, there's nothing wrong with playing with the pendulum and asking questions. And if you look on Google, it says it's a form of witchcraft. And then it also says like it's just like a new age thing. But I don't know. I believe that contacting spirits in any way, shape, or form can be bad. And you just can't
Yeah.
trust them because you can't see them. They can say, that
Right.
they're a little girl or they're your family member. And
Yes.
it's
And
hard to do
so
that.
with that incident, I was getting a response I felt like were almost like I don't know how can I like whatever that was knew the answer that I wanted and was giving it to me. And but it felt disingenuous. It didn't feel like it was my dad talking to me. And so I was just like, you cut it off.
Yeah. And what kind of answer did you get?
um One of the things was because, like I said, there was a string of deaths in the family. So before my dad had died, my mother-in-law had died like 6 months earlier and very sudden. Um, I said, where was she? Because I'm not super religious, but I was a little concerned because she went from being Catholic and then she married into the family and she changed to Jehovah's Witness. And it kind of scared me a little bit. Like, what happens with when people kind of flip over like that? Or I don't know. I would like to think like if there's a God, then God just accepts anybody who's, good-willed and I don't know. And I asked and it started spelling out the word hell. And I was like immediately like, nope. And I moved the planchette and I was like, no, we're not gonna finish that. And then I said, I want to talk to my dad. Is he here? And it answered yes. And I was like, okay, well, prove to me that it's you. I was like, what is the name that you would call me all the time? What was my nickname? And in my mind, I had like a certain way to spell that nickname, like not the he would call me honey all the time, which is like super vague kind of nickname, right? But it was the way he would always pronounce it in my mind. I would think it was spelled like Hunny, right? And so I'm thinking in my mind, like if this is really him, he'll spell it the way I want him to. And it did start spelling it like that. And I was just like, okay. And, can you talk to me about like what happened like right before you died? And it just kind of had a weird response that didn't have anything to do with in other words, he was in a nursing home for a couple days, and I was looking for some information on what had happened in there, which wasn't anything major, but if you weren't there, you wouldn't know. And it just gave me, like, some kind of weird answers that were sort of off the wall and didn't have anything to do with that, but still kind of had connections, like, it referred to my grandma's house, which we've all in the family have all lived in that house, like, at some point in time in our lives. It's a big house, and it just referenced her house, but that had nothing to do with anything that I was referring to, so I just felt like this is, like, bait and trap type situation, and I just didn't like it. It wasn't answering the questions that I needed, but it was almost like trying to flex on me, like, "I know information about you."
Yeah, that is interesting, and I'm sorry about your loss. Um, yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, it's just best not to trust that and just to have faith. And I know a lot of times it's hard to just go off of faith because you're worried about the future and the past, and you just got to know that things are going to be okay. And I know that's difficult to do, but yeah,
Yeah,
it's just best not to
yeah.
do that because bad things can happen. And I've played with like spirit boxes before, and I had a lot of activity and just life started going downhill, the way I was feeling, my health, everything. And I just don't recommend it to people. I know that a lot of people listening don't believe in that, but it's just not
I
worth
feel like
trying. It's not worth
what
finding
I kind
out.
of learned from using that spirit board and just sort of like the energy of kind of everybody in the family at that time was we're all like in distress because of, these things happen. And, they always say like they feed off that. They feed off that negative energy. So when you're angry and you're sad and you're crying all the time, like it's like a perfect environment. And I just kind of felt like things sort of, again, I didn't respond and get scared to just the little things that were happening. And I don't want to say little things because there were some kind of major things, but and the house was clean and quiet for 2 or 3 years. And then I had a really good friend show up one night, like 2 or 3 years after all that, and she showed up and she's really upset, like really upset and crying. So I'm like, well, come in the bedroom. My husband went and he slept on the couch. Like he was in there on the couch so we could have girl time and I could figure out what was going on. She comes in there and she's telling me like this wild story about why she's upset, and just typical marriage kind of stuff. And of course, she's like super upset. And she finally leaves and she was like, "Don't worry about it. I'll let myself out. I'll lock the door behind me." So I'm like, "Okay." And so I just stayed in the room and we had those doorknobs that are like the handles that pull down on. It wasn't like a knob. And after she took off, like she closed the door behind her and then I'm laying on the bed, but I'm laying on my stomach, like facing towards that door. And the handle like pulls down and opens. And I'm like, "Oh, she must have forgot something." And so I like waited for a second, nothing happened. I get up and go to the door and she's not there. I go to the front door's locked. So I'm like, "Okay, what was that?" And it was just another one of those things where I was like, "She brought that energy in here and we can't have that." And I politely told her the next day because she's very much like a believer in spiritual and all the things. And I was like, "Yeah, I think if we're gonna have any more discussions about what's happening, like we need to do that outside of this house because yeah, maybe those things didn't go away, they're just dormant because nobody's feeding into it, and then when somebody shows up upset and crying and all these things, like, it's, like, got a burst of energy off that, and I can't have that."
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you did all that because you had faith that there's something better out there, that there's life on the other side and that they're in a better place. So you just got to keep that faith. And
Yeah,
I mean, that's the reason why you played with it, was because you knew that could possibly be real. So
yeah.
I mean, I know things get hard, but you just gotta roll through the punches, and that is hard to do. But I'm glad you don't play with it anymore, and I wonder if there's a connection with that and the strange creature that was out in the woods. It's really hard to say and determine, but it could be a possibility if there is another element to these creatures.
Mhm. And I will say too, I checked the, BFRO website just to kinda see if there had been any other reports like in the area, and I think I only saw like one or two that were kind of in the vicinity, of course not directly there at the monument, but maybe because they're listed by county. And I saw some stuff, like one or two things in that county, and I was kind of a little surprised because I'm like, that is a very woodsy area. But it always begs to wonder like how many times, like me, I didn't go on there and put that because I don't know if that's what that was, so I'm hesitant. And there might be people that don't want to put it because they don't want to put it out there. So I just wonder how many things have actually happened out there that we don't even know because nobody said anything.
Yeah, and I know it kind of sounds crazy for me to compare Bigfoot to the paranormal and theorize on it, but I mean, it's no different than thinking they're a physical creature and still not know anything about it when people are like, "Oh, they're attracted to baby crying noises or they like the sound of music." Like, no one really knows, so we're
Right.
just trying to
Yeah,
figure
there's
it
kind of
out.
not really a rule. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I wouldn't be comparing it if I haven't seen the orbs out in the woods, like invisible things walking in the middle of daylight out in the woods, and you just can't see
Hmm.
what it is. And just how they seem to know your thoughts. Like, there's been moments where I thought, well, I haven't heard a wood knock, and pow, sounds like someone hit two baseball bats together. And there's been several moments like that where it's just like, that's a weird coincidence. Like, how does that just happen as soon as I think it? So, I mean, I feel like there is a paranormal side to these creatures, and people won't accept that. But I mean, if you listen to spiritual leaders, whether it's like Native Americans, the Catholic Church, they will tell you that the physical realm is intertwined with the spiritual realm.
I believe that.
Yeah.
I believe that. And I feel like with the situation with the monument, there's just so much going on there because you're talking about Native Americans and their spiritual realm and the things that, they believed in, or whatever's going on with that versus, settlers that were there and then like massacred, like, death that, and there's a lot of conspiracy theories too about that story, which, I kind of got into like more recently that I was like, well, that's really interesting. But, the fact is like people died out there. There's a cemetery there for it and a monument for that family, and there's nothing for the natives. I'd be pissed off too.
Yeah, absolutely. And by any chance, are there any Native American burial grounds out there as far as like the mounds, or is there
I
just
mean, I not that I know of. Now, I went it's probably been like a year ago. I just like went on a little kind of rampage of going on Google Maps because I was like, or Google Earth, I should say. I really wanted to see that area. And it was kind of horrifying when I looked at it because in all these years, like since then, I guess, never really thought to go in there and look at it on Google Earth. And it was a little horrifying to see how much in the woods it is. I don't know, like, I'm not big into like figuring out like on a map, especially like on Google Earth, like, miles or square footage or acres or anything. But I'm telling you, like, just from the way it looks, it's as far as I can see in every direction. And the only thing I could see on there that I'm interested in is it looks like there's another sign. I don't know, maybe like a little trail that people have sort of worn out by walking over. I don't know. It's hard to tell. It's Google Earth, but
you kind of cut out
um,
there? You said there's a little sign or some type of
yeah,
sign out there.
there's a sign. It looks like it's hard to tell. I zoomed into it the best I could on Google Earth, but I don't know if it's another historical marker or like some sort of sign. It's definitely not like there's pipes here or like a gas line sign. It's like some kind of something like with information on it. So I don't know if it's another historical monument or something, but I did do some further research kind of because I was intrigued about the sign, right? Like if I had known about that, I would have went the first time. And I do know that there's some of the family that was murdered were not found, and then some that were found like kind of way far out there, maybe where that sign was at. So we are planning a trip to go back. I haven't been back there since that happened, but we're planning a trip to go back. Right now in Texas, it's 112 degrees outside, so it's gonna have to wait until it's a little cooler. But we're definitely planning to go back here in the months to come, and I would love to try to track my way over to that sign just to kind of see what's out there and it says, but we'll see.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I guess the biggest takeaway from this phone call is that you experienced cryptid activity while out there doing paranormal research, and the area has had a lot of reports in the past regarding the paranormal. So, could it be connected with the paranormal? It's really hard to say, but we'll have to keep it in mind. And I'm not saying it is or it's not, but maybe in the future, when we find out more, we can go back to these podcasts and say, hey, these people said this and there was some truth to it. So,
Yep. I treat these podcasts like college classes. I'm listening to them because I'm learning information in order to help me sort of further figure out what I experienced or what I think it might be to help me come to a more solid conclusion.
yeah, absolutely. And I'm open to any theories or possibilities, and I don't disregard anyone's accounts. So I appreciate you, Silvia, for being a guest today on Sasquatch Theory, and you did an excellent
Thanks.
job at relaying your experiences with me, and I appreciate your help today.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, and good luck teaching, and I hope the best for you and your family.
Thanks, you too.
All right, take care. All right, Silvia, thank you very much for sharing your possible Bigfoot experience with me. And it does sound like Bigfoot activity to me. The fact that it was charging through the woods and it came right at you, that is a clear sign of Sasquatch. But then you mentioned that you heard what sounded like a big set of wings in the trees. That does not sound like Bigfoot activity. I mean, that possibly could be Mothman, and it makes me wonder. Other people have seen creatures or beings that have wings that are not Mothman, and a lot of people describe it like Jeepers Creepers, which is scary to think about because when you think of Jeepers Creepers, you think that's just a movie, but I've had reports from people like in North Carolina that talk about seeing this winged entity, and hopefully that's not what it was. But yeah, I would not play with the Ouija board, and I'm not trying to put you down, and I know that you were looking for answers, and I think a lot of people that research the paranormal have lost someone, and they're just seeking answers, wondering if there really is life after death, if there's something else beyond our existence. So in those regards, I completely understand. I just want to urge people not to play with Ouija boards because it can open up a lot of unwanted doors, and once you open those doors, it's really hard to shut them, and for a lot of people, they stay open for the rest of their lives. So yeah, I appreciate you very much, and I appreciate all the listeners, and until the next one, you guys be safe out in the forest.